we demystify what goes on behind the therapy room door. Join us on this voyage of discovery and co-creative conversations. This is The Therapy Show, Behind Closed Doors podcast.
With Bob Cooke
and Kellie Barratt.
Hello and welcome to The Therapy Show, Behind Closed Doors. I'm Kellie Barratt and I'm here with Mr. Bob Cooke. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Kellie. Now, I think I missed the Mr. Wonderful Bob Cooke.
Yes.
That was, you got into the theme that last podcast, but I can cope with being demoted.
Yes, well, it always makes me think of Jackie. She said that every time. So it's a nice way to keep Jackie part of us. So maybe I'll adopt it.
Carry on again. So what number is this?
This is number 207. And today we're going to be talking about from individual to group therapy. Is this important within the therapy process?
Well, it's a great subject, and I know you run groups.
I do, just one. I know you used to run a lot of groups. I just do the one.
But you traveled the journey from individual to group psychotherapy, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I just did a few weeks of individual, and then I was invited in, and I spent 5 years in group therapy then.
Yeah, but I meant. So I didn't mean you in group therapy. I meant you running a group.
Yes. So I think I probably I started my group in 2017. So how many years is that now? 8 coming. Well, in my 8th year. So yeah, and I did start a second group, but I've gone back to just the one.
I think it's 2 dimensions of this podcast. One is, from the therapist talking about the merits of individual psychotherapy, for clients, as opposed to the merits or disadvantages of going to a group and all that, which you must do.
Yeah.
And also from a training perspective, what takes a person to start a group up rather than stay as an individual therapist. So I think there's 2 dimensions to it. I'm going to let's start with the first, shall we? Which is about, and you must do it all the time. So it's like, you must get, this is an assumption anyway, you must get clients from individual therapy and then you ask them to go in a group if you think it's going to be positive for them. Is that right?
That is, yeah. I like to have a good working relationship with them before they join the group.
So what's your thoughts about advantage and disadvantages of individual versus group psychotherapy? I don't have any, but
yes, yeah. So I suppose first of all, I think once we've done some individual work, it's good for the client to experience a group, so I can see what they're like with other people, and they can get to practice all their therapy issues in the small microcosm of the group, and then before they kind of practice it out there in the world.
So you see it then really as an extension of their individual clinical work, or do you see it as an expansion, or do you see it as something they have to do? Or
No, they don't have to do it, of course, but I'd say most clients are quite nervous and apprehensive before they come into group, but once they're in group, they tend to really like it. So, but I see it as an expansion. So it's like, to broaden their therapeutic experience, really.
And if they don't want to go in a group, what's your thoughts on that? Do you sort of recommend or require or say that's okay, or how do you see it?
Oh, yeah, good question. Yeah, so I encourage them, but ultimately it's their decision. Yeah. Some people come in because it's cheaper and they can't afford, individual costs each week. But I see it as a supportive mechanism. So and so it's not just the support of me, but then they broaden their support from others as well in the group. Obviously, if there's no issues.
Yeah. So you're a therapist, and I think it's fairly rare because group psychotherapy seems to have declined in the psychotherapy world, and get to that in a minute. But you're one of the therapists that does run groups. So sounds like you see the clinical journey from individual to group psychotherapy as a service you offer in the service of the client if they want to take that up.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's a group's really great for, well, I'd imagine it's great for all clients in some respect, because there's no it provides a real magnifying glass to stuff that might be a bit hidden, and it comes out in groups. So whereas it might not come out with just me in individual therapy. So yeah, I think groups are great. It's a shame that there aren't so many around. But yeah, like you said, we'll come on to that.
So when wouldn't you invite somebody into a group?
If they had a long history of abuse, perhaps, and so and we didn't have a good working relationship. Perhaps if somebody was very disordered.
Yeah, you see, I think the last one, when I ran groups for so many years, 30 odd years, more, 35 years, for me, I saw the road from individual clinical world to group very much the same as you. So it's a service I offered. Doesn't mean they have to take it up, but I did see it as an expansion. And in terms of criteria, I had a few, but one of them certainly is the last one you mentioned, which is their level of personality disturbance. So I would think about that for many reasons, about whether it is better individual therapy for somebody who's, say, got a personality disorder, for lots of reasons. One, for them, of course, but also how would that be in a group?
Yes, the impact on everybody else in the group. Yeah,
and that might be okay, but I would think about it, because I think with some personality disorders, a group isn't always useful. Now, I go against the thinking of Eric Berne, because Eric Berne, who was the originator of transaction analysis, where I trained in and you did, 1950, 1960, he worked in Carmel Psychiatric Hospital. He was a psychiatrist, and he created this new model of working with people in groups. And all the people in his groups were personality disordered and disturbed because he took it from a psychiatric population. I think the big difference from running groups back then that he ran and the ones that a lot of people run today, including me, is he didn't deal with regression.
Ah, okay.
That type of population. His encouragement was to keep them in the here and now. He'd teach them about different parts of the personality and help them know when they're in the here and now when they weren't. And I think that's a big difference from a lot of the groups today where regression is part of the work. Because when you're working with someone with personality disorder, it isn't necessarily effective to encourage regression.
And so would he just put them straight into a group from the, without the individual therapy?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
What I do know is that he didn't do any regression. So he just taught them about transactions and stimulus response, and when they might be caught up in ulterior transactions, and how do they know when they're in the here and now. And so he wouldn't do any work in groups which took them into their child ego state.
I didn't know that. And I suppose with a disordered community, like group like that would make loads of sense, really. Just kind of that working with the nuts and bolts.
He would be, I suspect, called in his day, but he didn't have this phrase, a CBT psychotherapist.
Oh, yes.
He didn't work with the past. Talked about the past, but never encouraged any of his clients to go into the child ego state. Now, he didn't do that per se in the neurotic population, but he certainly didn't do that in the, let's call the personality disordered community. isn't always effective for people who are, personality disordered, because the fear is that they will split again and stay stuck in some regressed place and not be able to get back to adult because their adult is not strong enough.
Yeah. Strengthening the adult. Would that be the phrase?
We go to the past.
Mm.
Talk about it. That's
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
And he would help people know what parts of themselves they were transacting from adult, not encourage them to go to different parts of themselves, but talk it almost like a CBT therapist and talk about how to change thinking from different parts of the self.
That's really interesting. And it makes loads of sense to me.
Very different from the psychotherapy groups in the neurotic population in 2025. And I wouldn't even suggest somebody who was in individual therapy with me who perhaps had a personality disorder to go into a group, because I don't think necessarily psychotherapy is effective, because the person might get stuck in some regressed part of the self and not have a strong enough adult to be able to access the here and now particularly quickly.
Yeah. And I guess if you're on a psychiatric ward, that functioning outside in society is really important. So that's the first step.
So when you talk about the road from individual psychotherapy to group, I think there's criteria. So that would be certainly one of them. The other one, of course, would be around contracts. So if they had a contract for individual psychotherapy, they may not decide to have a contract to go into group psychotherapy. They may think, well, the work's been done, I've achieved what I wanted to achieve, I feel a lot better, or whatever it is. And that's also fine with me, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and me.
So I think the journey is a long journey, by the way. Like you, I would see somebody maybe, 3 months or so in individual therapy, maybe perhaps even longer, actually, before I offered that route, even if I did.
Yeah. I'd like about 6 months if possible. But, and when I've not done that, it's been tricky.
So the road from individual to group psychotherapy is an arc. It's a process in many ways, but it's also a time where individual therapists, well, me, say here, will spend a good amount of time in individual psychotherapy before they're going to group.
Yeah.
The other things about moving from individual to group therapy, which I think need to be considered, is things like how are they with sharing me?
Oh, yes. Good question. Yeah.
I would have lots of discussions with anyone who went into group psychotherapy, things like that. How are you with sharing me? Are you aware that if you go into group therapy, you won't have access to individual therapy with me on a weekly basis? Obviously, I would encourage the person to take their crises and their therapy to the group and not have the facility to have me at the same time. And how do they feel about that? For some people, that might be too challenging.
Yeah. And what if they think they'd be okay and then they're not?
Oh, then we talk about it in the group, and then we decide if they're what they want to do. So if they feel like it's counterproductive, there is the chance to work it through in the group. But if it's too intense for them, then we might go back to individual therapy and may then go back into the group. But I think if that actually happened, I'd attempt to work it out in the group first. And it's all grist to the mill. So it's an important discussion to have if they suddenly say to me, well, I can't find this very difficult. I'm used to having you individually as a psychotherapist, and now I haven't, even though I said I think I'll be okay. I'm not okay. So I would suggest working through in the group before we do anything else.
Yeah.
If they won't do that for whatever reasons, then it's fine to stay in individual therapy as far as I'm concerned. But that would be interesting if they couldn't cope with it.
Yes. And that, I'm just wondering if they might have adapted to us to join, and they've not really thought that through fully.
The other thing I talk about in depth before we move from individual therapy to group therapy, if we do, is the concept of shame.
Oh, say a bit more.
Well, they're suddenly going into a group where they may be required to talk about their own issues in a group. And a lot of clients have such a shame-based system that might be quite challenging for them. I mean, hopefully we would have done the work on shame to enable them to do that. But those are the sort of discussions I would have before they went into group therapy.
That's a great question to start to think about the shame, because that it is hard to go into a group and to share your vulnerabilities in front of other people you don't know.
So when we talk about the road from individual to group psychotherapy, it isn't so straightforward. I think there's lots of things to consider for the client and for the therapist. And it isn't about, let's put it another way, this client comes first. So whatever's best for them.
Yes. Yeah.
And at the same time, I say there's other considerations about moving into a group, even if they want to move into a group. I might think it's not good for them, for example, in terms of where they are in terms of their clinical treatment.
Yeah, I've said that to clients, like I think it's too soon.
By saying that, you must think developmentally then.
Yeah.
Same as me. I think there's a developmental part to this.
Yes, yeah. And that, the client has got propensity to push themselves when they're not ready in other areas of their life. They're probably going to do this around the group too. But
and the other dimension, of course, is for the therapist. Is another dimension altogether. Who may have done their training in individual psychotherapy and never trained to be a group psychotherapist. Now, they may decide to do it because perhaps they've been in group psychotherapy themselves, so they have a model there.
Yeah.
They may go off and do some specialized training, how to run groups. But in the road from individual to group therapy for somebody in terms of a therapist and their training, I think that might be one of the reasons why today in 2025 is such a different world. When I started my first psychotherapy group in 1988, when there were many therapists around groups. Here we are 30 odd years later, and there's not so many therapists offering groups. And I often think, well, is this because in modern day training of psychotherapy, there isn't enough modules or time spent on training them?
Well, I've never thought about it, but of course, because if you've not been in a group, and I can't quite remember, but I don't think there's any the specific modules about training about how to be a therapist and run a group. So
maybe the training, you talking about the training you were in?
Yes.
There are trainings that do group training into the psychotherapy for 5 years. But the one you're talking about, which is I know, of course, because I had a lot to do with that training, there was probably only one weekend, if that. I'm not sure. But I do know that earlier therapists in the late 90s, beginning of 2000s, probably had a lot of their therapy in group therapy.
Ah, right. So they had the experience.
You were talking about yourself in a group therapy, and I think that's very common. So perhaps therapists who've had a lot of group therapy themselves have a model and they feel able to do it or offer it.
And there might be a conception that they're really hard work. I love my group running groups, but you know, it is a lot of people to hold at once.
There might be something. I was at a recent conference. I go to many conferences in the integrative world as well as the TA world, but more in the integrative TA world. And I run a group and teach off it as a demonstration for people at the conference. Many people saw running a group as very challenging because they weren't trained in it, or they'd never been in group therapy to have a model. So I don't know if they saw it as hard work. They just thought they weren't equipped to be able to move from individual, to being a group psychotherapist.
Yeah.
So when I ran this conference, did that, but I also did another presentation with this title of this podcast, Individual to Group Psychotherapy, for the therapists. And most of them wanted to know how to do it.
Yes, yeah.
Because they felt really challenged because they hadn't done much training, they'd not been in a group. And how do you move from being an individual therapist to a group psychotherapist? A, without having training, B, not being in a training group, C, not having a supervisor also perhaps didn't know, and 4, they'd had no specialist training. So I can see where the fear came from.
There's a lot more to consider in a group, you know, so it is administratively a flow of clients to keep the group going as well, you know, so.
Yeah, and also I was brought up in the early 80s in what was called group marathons.
Yes, yeah.
With people like different therapists, I mentioned so much here. And as time went on, Richard Erskine, of course. So I went to, not only was I in group psychotherapy, but I went on to marathons which were 2 days long, 3 days long, and Richard's was 5 days long. And he did one 10 days long. So not only did I understand the benefit of it psychotherapeutically, but I had a model to work from.
Yeah.
And most of the people I talked about to in the workshop in Slovenia had never been in group therapy themselves.
Yeah, not even a process group, you know, like a.
Well, they might have been in a process group. That's often very different in a training group because that's processing what's happening in the training, you know, in the little group itself. It's not usually contracts for aggression. So I said to them at the conference, I said, well, if you want to become a group psychotherapist, and these are the advantages I think are good and not good and XXX, get yourself into a group therapy. Next question, of course, which is the same in the United Kingdom, there weren't many people around groups.
Yeah, and TA was created to be run from groups, was it?
From a sort of a more here than now, you know, tracing transactions, ulterior transactions, duplex transactions, different types of transactions from different parts of the self. But it was never intended to then, with regression, work with child ego state.
Okay. So it's evolved.
It evolved in the 80s, yeah, and the 90s. But as we go into the 2000s, for whatever, I can only talk about Manchester.
Yeah.
But I think in my travels in the UK, I think it's the same. I don't meet many therapists that run groups. You're one of the few, for example.
Yeah.
I probably know, well, I could probably count on my hand.
Gosh.
Whereas back in the day, it was much, much more the norm.
Yeah, and yet group supervision is quite popular. So, or maybe it's not, maybe just popular for me. But
no, well, that's an interesting one itself. not thought about that as a sort of a parallel, but can you parallel it? Because, you know, group supervision's been around for a long, long time, both in the BACP, the UKCP, the National Psychologists Association. It's an adult to adult process. You don't do therapy. It's a very adult to adult process. I think that's a very different.
Yeah, I agree.
It also lends itself to Zoom in the modern era.
Yeah.
Whereas group psychotherapy is dealing with many different transferences, often lots of regression. And I don't know if the modern day psychotherapists have been trained to know how to deal with it all.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I don't think I've ever seen any group psychotherapy training. Perhaps I've not been looking in the right places, but nothing springs to mind.
Oh, well, it's closed. This is it, you see. There was a whole training in Manchester at what was called the Red House, which is now closed down, and in what was called group analytical training.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
Because I come from the humanistic world and I was in a lot of group therapies myself from different people. But that was really well known, really established. That closed down 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago.
I've never heard of that. And I've been in this field for 12, 13 years or something.
I was just talking to the other day, one of my supervisees 25 years ago did a wonderful, and she was talking about how wonderful the group analytical training was. And she said it now closed down, so I don't know how long it's closed down. But you're right. But if and when I put a CPD workshop on back in the day, and I had to run groups, it was full.
So people want it. So there's a hunger for the training.
Oh, if I put a workshop on now, it would just fill.
So how come you're not doing more workshops on it then?
That's me, because I was trained for a long time, and I seeped in marathons and got a model for doing it, and I know how to work aggressively in groups. I know how to handle transferences. I know about containment. I know about who should go in groups and who should not go in groups. It's seeped in me. I'm going to write a book on relational group process.
Brilliant. Good idea.
Just because there was not much written about it.
I suppose I was thinking it could be like a course, like a supervision course, like a 5-6 day thing, if there's enough interest.
Yeah, so this journey we're talking about has different dimensions to think about. The clinical journey, and also maybe the therapist's journey and training. Sort of parallel each other in a way.
Yeah. So you can do it when you've done the training, basically. Yeah,
and now we haven't got a situation where there's many group psychotherapists around, so there's not the chance to go into a group. It all becomes more challenging.
So there's a gap in the market, Bob.
Well, that's one way to look at it. It'd be interesting for people listening to this podcast or watching it, with their experience about either being in a group themselves therapeutically, which I think is really wonderful, and whether they will consider running a psychotherapy group or whatever, because I think that's interesting.
Yes. Yeah, well, maybe they could leave us some comments and then we could.
That'd be fabulous.
Yes.
That would be fabulous.
Come on, listeners, send us your ideas. I think that probably wraps us up, Bob.
Yeah, and I love the chance to talk about it, and it reminds me of all the decades I did group therapy.
Yes.
So thank you for that time to be able to speak about it.
I remember the time you said that you always thought about running a group on Christmas Day morning.
Yeah, I know. I always in the training talked about that, and I never did it.
No.
Where it comes from, because early in the mid 90s, late 90s, I used to, for at least 3 or 4 years, go over to Adelaide and teach people how to be psychotherapists. And the person that I stayed with, who invited me over, was a psychotherapist over there. She ran a Christmas morning every year.
Wow.
Christmas morning psychotherapy group, which
Mm.
she said was very popular.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's where I probably mentioned it from.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, Christmas is tough for people, isn't it? So
it's very challenging.
So, but that's a title for another time. Lovely to see you, Bob. And
Lovely to see you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this.
Yeah. Well, it was a good and informative topic.
What's the one for next week?
Next week, I'm just looking now. So next week is number 208, and it is what happens in the therapy process if we don't like our clients, and does it matter?
What a wonderful title. I look forward to
Yes. Lovely. See you next time, Bob. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Therapy Show, Behind Closed Doors podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. We'll be back next week with another episode.